making a simple animation in Blender. We are going to do this by creating a paper airplane and making it fly through the air. So the first thing is to have a paper airplane, and you should have one already. Mine is here. The first thing I want to do with it is to make it significantly smaller, because we're going to act like this grid is about the size of the floor that we're flying it, or the room that we're flying it through. So we definitely don't want it that big, so it's not going to go very far. So first thing is to get the scale tool, and let's make it significantly smaller. Once it's smaller, let's zoom in on a little bit so we can see it. And that's a pretty good size. Now I want to move it around a little bit. So I'm going to bring it up and bring it back. I probably want to start kind of in the corner over here, and we'll make it fly over to the other corner. So one thing I want you to do before starting the animation is to bring in a plane for the floor. If we don't do that, then it will just be a black background, and looks a little better if there's a floor. So let's add a plane, mesh plane, and sticks it right in the middle. Let's scale it. So get the scale tool, click and drag out a little further than the grid, and let's bring it above the grid just a tiny bit to get that grid out of the way. Okay, so we've got our plane and our paper airplane, floor and airplane. So let's start the animating. Now these down here is how we animate. These are frames down here, and as I click with my mouse and drag around, it takes that bar around to different frames, and they are counting right here on this plane. So I've got a plane here, airplane up here, just a flat piece of material is called a plane, and so each one of these represents a frame in the animation. So of course we're going to start with frame 1. So go out to frame 1, right click on your airplane, and we are going to set a keyframe. Now the first thing, before we do that, your default here, frames, it starts at 1 and ends at 250. Now each frame, each second has 24 frames in it. So regular movies usually have 24 frames per second. So every second of animation there are 24 frames within that, 24 positions of that airplane. So we're just going to do about a 2-second animation, and so we don't want 250 frames, and that will take forever to render. We just want about 50. So let's take that down. Click down here and type in 50 and hit enter, and it shaves it down to 50 frames. That way our animation will be nice and short, about 2 seconds. So on our first frame, we want to set a keyframe. Keyframes are positions in an animation that are certain frames where the position changes quite a bit. So we don't want to tell the airplane where to be every frame, because there's 24 every second, and that will just take forever. So we do it every once in a while where there's a key position. We call it a keyframe, and we set a keyframe, and then when it renders, it goes in between the keyframes, and it tweens, that it's called, and it makes it move from one keyframe to the other in a smooth way. So it fills in all the frames for us. So we'll just set 4 or 5 keyframes here and make our airplane go on a simple path. So let's give it a keyframe first to start, a starting position here, just off the floor, up a little bit. So a keyframe, to set it, you type I on the keyboard. Now there's different types of keyframes. There's a location keyframe that just sets the location of it. There's a rotation, it just sets the rotation or scaling, or it sets a keyframe for just location, rotation, or scaling. Now we want all of them. We want location, rotation, and scale. So this button right here does that. Location, rotation, scale, sets all of them in case we change one or the other, which we will change multiple ones in here in just a minute. So we have a keyframe there, and when we set a keyframe, it turns to orange. So we know where there's a keyframe. The rest are white. So keyframe number 1, and it sets a yellow bar here also. Keyframe number 1 is yellow, and it's right here. Our plane starts right there. Now we want it to go across this floor or this room and land over here. So we're kind of up in the air right now. So let's go to the end and set an end keyframe, and then we'll change the keyframes in between. So let's move it. Now click over here on frame 50. Let's do 49 instead, just in case. So let's move it forward on the grid. If you hit number 7 on your numeric keypad, not on the numbers above the letters, but all the way over on the right, click number 7, and it gives us a perfect view, overhead view. So let's move it up towards the front of the room and over to the right. And we're going to have it go from this corner to this corner. Okay, and then you can come back down here to the floor view, and let's drag it down to the floor close to it. Okay, now if we set a keyframe right there on number 49, make sure you're clicked on number 49. You can click and drag with the mouse. Oops, now I just moved it. Click and drag with the mouse, or select it, click down here on each frame. It moves frame to frame. Or your keys, left and right arrow keys, do that the same thing. Go from frame to frame. So go to frame 49. I need to put mine back in position because it went back to the keyframe. Drag it down towards the floor. Okay, now before I move it again, I'm going to, or before I move the keyframes, I'm going to set a keyframe. Clicking I on my keyboard and location, rotation, scale. Now I've got 2 keyframes, and it should move in between the 2. Okay, just like that. So my airplane now has an animation. I can play it right here. Just that simple, there's an animation. Now it's not a very realistic one because it's sideways and it's flying sideways and it's perfectly straight, which is not totally accurate with a paper airplane usually, unless you have a really good one. So we're going to change that a little bit. So we'll go about 10 frames at a time and just do 4 or 5 more. So on frame 10, so it's moved the position a little bit, and we're going to move it just a little bit more. Well, we'll keep the position, but I want to rotate it and tilt the wings just a little bit. So frame 10, at frame 10 it's in that position. Frame 20 goes a little further, 30 further, 40 further, until it lands at 50. So on number 10, I think I'll have it kind of stay over here to the left and then curve over to the right. So I'll get my top view again by hitting 7 on the numeric keypad on the far right of the keyboard, and that way rotation will be a lot easier. So if I click R on the keyboard, I'll rotate it a little bit left, and I also want to drag it up a little bit so it stays on that left side. Now, before I move it or do anything, I need to set a keyframe, so I'll click I and set a keyframe. So now I've got keyframe from 1 to 10. Okay, so it kind of turns to the left a little bit and then it goes down. So we're going to keep it over to the left a little bit. So on 10, it's rotated and turning to the left. Now on 20, it needs to come up higher because it's facing this direction where we want to be, about right here. So on 20, drag it up a little bit further. Keep the rotation, or maybe we can rotate it just a little bit more, and then set the keyframe. I and click. Now we can check our flight path. Okay. I think on 10 it kind of scoots over a little bit. I might need to rotate that a little bit more. So I can make changes to these keyframes, but each time I do, I have to set the keyframe again. If not, it will just go away. The settings that I made. Okay. Now on 30, I'm going to not want to be so high, but a little bit higher. And I'm going to rotate it just a little bit the other way now, because I want it to start coming back. So I've done that. Now I want to set it. Set the keyframe. Okay, so it goes up and it starts to curve and come back down. Okay, now on 40, maybe come up just a little bit, or I could keep it about the same spot because it's coming way down here. But I want to rotate it a little bit. So click the R and rotate it quite a bit and set the keyframe. And now I've got all my keyframes. Let's see how it goes. Ooh. Now it makes a sudden rotation back to normal, and I don't think I want that. So on frame 50 or 49, I'm going to rotate it the same direction that it was flying the last few keyframes and set that rotation. Okay, that's pretty good. There's my flight path coming across the room. It dips down quite a bit there. I guess maybe I should change this rotation a little bit more and set it. Okay. And then maybe a little bit more rotation on this one. Okay, so I've got a good flight path. At any time also I can change the view. It doesn't matter what view it's in. I just wanted the top view so I could rotate it properly. See, now it's coming from above and landing down on the floor. If I look at this angle, I can see the curve of the path. It goes left and then goes back right. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now there's one other thing I want to do with it, and that's change the tilt of the wings. Because if it curves, it needs to tilt the wings a little bit. So on frame 10, frame 10, there's a keyframe. So I'll change that keyframe, and I'm going to now rotate it from the back. So get a view from the back or the front. Click R, and it's going to rotate it down to the side, which is what I want. Okay, so it tilts a little bit as it's turning, and I need to set that keyframe, and let's see what that looks like. So when it turns left, it tilts a little bit, and now that it's starting to turn right on keyframe 20, I want to tilt that back to the right. So click R, let's tilt it to the right. Okay. So depending on which angle you're at on the view, that's how it rotates. So be careful at what angle you're at. Okay, I need to set that. And let's see how that looks. So it tilts left, tilts back to the right. That's pretty good. Here I want to tilt it again to the right a little bit more. But tip down because it's heading down. Okay. So left and then right and then to my destination. And it's pretty good there, I think. Mostly it needs to be tilted at the first few frames. So I've got it curving while I rotate it to do that. I've got it tilting. I rotate the wings up and down to do that, and it looks like a real flight when I do that. So I can play it here. I can play it from any angle that I want. And there's the flight of my paper airplane.